morning, world. This is Steve Rao, the host of Pod and Roku TV's edition. And I want to begin this week. And moving forward, I'm going to be coming in usually on Fridays to wrap up the week of World Edition, given a lot of other media appearances I'm making. Just joined WPTF Radio as a commentator on Friday and taking more responsibility at PBS Carolina. But I'm honored to be here today as the host of this wonderful show, greeting you live from the All-America city of Morrisville, the eighth largest state in the United States, North Carolina. And today, before I begin my monologue, just a couple things going on in the world. There's been a drone strike in Ukraine against in the Crimea against a Russia. There's been a gunman loose in Texas who killed one 9-year-old, and there's a lot of things going on in the world that we're gonna talk about today. Steph Curry had a 50-point game, so he set the all-time record. But today I want to begin with celebrating and kicking off Asian American Heritage Month, which is Asian American Heritage Month is a day that celebrates the remarkable contributions of Asian Americans across this country and the world. This day was started in 1978 when Jimmy Carter was president, and was signed into law in 1992 when George H.W. Bush was president. It basically is to celebrate the contributions of Asian American and Pacific Islanders, which means South Asia, India, Nepal, Pakistan, Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Cambodia, countries like that. South Pacific Islander countries like Hawaii. And I could go on and on. Korea, North Korea, China, which is really still South Asia. And there are about 18.4 million Asian Americans in the United States. There are in North Carolina, where Mark Lee and I live, about 309,000. And so it's an amazing demographic and a lot of really interesting work being done. Meanwhile, one of them, Vivek Ramaswamy, running for president on the Republican side. Nikki Haley, a more viable presidential candidate, the former UN ambassador running for the White House. And of course, Kamala Harris, whose mother is from the nation of India. There are a lot of other trailblazers we're going to be talking about. Maybe once a week or every show, we can talk about other Asian leaders. So I'm going to give that as a homework assignment. But I want to celebrate this great month. And a lot of the local TV networks here are doing things to cover this. So we're going to go ahead and get the show started. I'll be here for a few minutes before I head out. But Mark, let's go ahead and get started and talk a little about Asian American Islander Month, and then maybe dive into some of these issues. I know we also forgot to say there's a lot of turmoil in the Sudan, and this is what we're dealing with right now.
No, we have a guest as well, and he's an innovator and a person that's involved with innovation. He is a children's author, but he has also done work with an amazing individual that is with the Morehead Planetarium, that being Tony Genzano. And Tony Genzano was the force behind the Morehead Planetarium and all of that. I was actually impressed with one of the things that he did, which was that he was very much about knowing all the aspects of the job. So, sometimes people will only know one aspect of their job, but it seems like, as I was reading about Tony, he wanted to know the various aspects of the job and wanted to be proficient in the various aspects as well. But I'm going to bring in Michael, and he can share a little bit about Tony, who actually the Morehead Planetarium was where a lot of our early astronauts got their training. And a lot of people do not know that, but I'll bring in Michael so he can share a little bit about this great history that is right here in Durham, North Carolina as well. So Michael, glad you were able to join us and tell us about Tony Genzano. Like I said, I read a little bit about him and I saw that he was an astronaut trainer, and that he also, like I said, was one that seemed that he wanted to know not just his job, but the job of everybody from the quote unquote low level jobs to the senior executives, and wanted to be sure that he had an understanding of what they were doing and had a good understanding of that. Is that a correct assessment of Mr. Genzano?
It absolutely is, and thank you so much, Mark, for that wonderful introduction. And Dr. Rao, I'm a big fan, and thank you so much for having me on the show today. Tony Genzano was the second employee at Morehead Planetarium. Morehead Planetarium was the first planetarium in the South, the first on a college campus. And it was like, this big gift that was given to us by John Motley Moorhead III, and everybody just wondered, why? Why would you have given us this wonderful top hat when what we really need are, socks and boots? And so when Tony joined, he was the second employee working under a man named Roy Marshall. And Roy Marshall was the director, had his own TV show, was kind of the Bill Nye, the science guy of his day. He had his own radio show. He had his own TV show. And Tony, after about 2 years, the director left. And so Tony suddenly had to take over. And so there he was. He knew the technical aspects very well. He understood how the Star Machine worked. He understood how to bring kids into the theater and how to give them the right kind of show and get them back out of the theater. So he had to learn all the other jobs, and he took that very, very seriously, because this crowning jewel that John Motley Moorhead III gave us, the Moorhead building is a stunningly beautiful building with marble columns and wood paneling everywhere. And I mean, he spared no expense when he gave this to us.
Definitely sounds like it and everything. One of the things I was curious about is one of the things we talk about here on the network is the state of education. And some people are thinking that we are not teaching enough about science and about things even in the technology fields and all in that space. As one who's done research on Genzano and as one who's also in that field to some degree yourself, and I've definitely love for folks to learn more about your history as well. How do you think we are doing as a nation in the sense of teaching about science?
It always feels to me like science is just so much fun, and it's very, very exciting. I mean, if a baby or a toddler is any one or two things, that baby is a scientist. That baby is also an artist. I mean, if you think about it, art and science go hand in hand in terms of exploration and experimentation and trying new things. And just, if I do this, what will happen? If I try that, what will happen? And so I feel like we do a really good job of getting kids excited about science, excited about art, excited about learning. Somewhere around middle school is where it seems to get a little bit befuddled, where we start focusing so hard on grades and on standardized testing. And some kids can definitely lose their way. I think the better we treat our teachers, the more we can have, really very cultured teachers who've been around for a while, who want to stay in the profession for a long time. I was a teacher for about 4 years. And what I found was that it's a hard job, and it's one that you have to prepare for every single day. And it's just a lot of fun to work with the kids. But I mean, back to your main question, are we doing the right job when it comes to educating kids on science? I think there are so many tools, and I wish that we were, capturing them and getting them more excited about it consistently from, say, grades 7 through 12. I wish we had some more things to do. Unfortunately, there are places like Moorhead Planetarium and other science institutions that are close by where they do informal science education that can really get, they can get into your bloodstream and get you very excited. About learning science.
And along those same lines, I was wondering, what is your thoughts around space exploration? We're seeing that a lot of people are going into space exploration. We're seeing private companies like Elon Musk and others that are going into space now. But I was wondering your thoughts, and also what you think Michael Genzano would be thinking. Tony Genzano would be thinking about that at this particular time, because it does seem that we have a lot of folks that are excited about the new direction of space exploration, but we've also got things that are going on in our own society that need to be addressed as well. But I just wanted your thoughts, and also if you have any insights on what Tony would be thinking as well.
Oh, I'm sure that Tony would be very excited to see the state of us, getting back to the moon in the next couple of years, seeing Elon Musk and all of these other great innovators who are, trying to find different ways of getting us up into outer space. Tony was, he was only educated through the high school level. He was the son of 2 Italian immigrants who never really spoke any English, grew up in Philadelphia, and they had 10 kids. he was the fifth of 10 kids. And so, he went and he worked for an electrician, and he brought the money back home to his parents, but they still didn't have enough money to send him off to college. And so he was always the kind of crackerjack, guy who would find a way of making something work on a shoestring budget. He was the guy who would try to find ways of, educating these astronauts who came here for 16 years in Chapel Hill with mostly nobody knowing about it. And so, I think he would be very tickled about the fact that we're going into space more consistently. And you did mention one thing, Mark, which is, if we're going into space, don't we have other things that we also need to be taking care of? Well, if we were taking care of the poor, if we were taking care of the homeless, if we were taking care of the hungry 100 years before, space exploration, then I would say, sure, yeah, maybe you're onto something here. But I think that there's this misguided idea that we want to somehow divert money to the space program from the mouths of hungry children. And I just don't think that that's ever the case. For every dollar spent on space exploration, you get about $6 back when it comes to really cool, innovative things like Mylar and Kevlar and, some of the things that we just take for granted here in our everyday society. So,
it sparked a whole generation of innovation, in terms of engineering and STEM and science. And I think a lot of the technology we have today, even on our iPhones, is more than they had in some of the rocket ships that were sent, right? So I haven't been to the planetarium after COVID, so I look forward to coming back and seeing it. And, it's and what are your thoughts about SpaceX now and space exploration? And, of course, the last trip didn't go so well, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, Dr. Rao is a really good question. Space exploration and SpaceX in particular, I mean, they are first principle thinkers. They come down to the, if this battery costs too much off the shelf, can we make our own battery? If this rocket ship, is too expensive off the shelf, how do we make our own? And so with innovations, you're always going to have those moments where you have a minor setback. But I mean, look how far they've come. Look how quickly they've gotten there. Who else has a cherry red roadster that's orbiting the sun, with a mannequin astronaut at the wheel?
Right.
Well, great. I want to bring in some of our other panelists as well, including our fellow analyst from Down Under. I'm not sure if he's down under in Australia today or not, but I'm sure he may have some thoughts around science and technology. He is a great hedge fund investor and does a lot of other things as well. So I'm going to bring in Shaquille and see what thoughts he has about innovation and all along those lines, and also bring in our person that was a dean over there in Utah and has definitely done a lot of other great work as well, that being Dr. Dan Worthington. So I'll bring both of them in and see if they've got any thoughts about what's going on also. So definitely, Shaquille, you're one that even invests sometimes in some of these science projects. So you may have some thoughts about what Mr. Neese is talking about.
Welcome to the show, Michael. I won't push back at you too hard. It's your first time here, so I won't push back on you too hard about the comments you made about standardized testing and teachers, because I know that that's what Mark is expecting me to do, so I won't. But I reckon you've probably got the coolest title that any young kid or teenager would want. You're not an astronaut, you're an astronaut trainer. I think that's absolutely phenomenal. But no, look, I think that exploration into space is fantastic. Exploration into any area is something that we should be doing and should be pursuing and encouraging our next generations to look at. And there's so much stuff. I'm obviously no expert on space, but there's so much stuff that I hear about, the potential of mining asteroids, for example, for their mineral wealth. What are we going to do about the space debris that's, orbiting the Earth at the moment from old satellites and old rockets and all that sort of stuff. To an article that I read only a few days ago that sort of got a bit of a chuckle in the house that I'm at the moment. I'm in New Zealand at my cousin's house. So south of Australia, even more down under, Mark Lee, where they were saying that people would have to sign a contract that if they actually went up onto the into that new sort of space hotel that they're planning on building, that they wouldn't be allowed to have sex while they're up there. Which, I think as any red-blooded male on the planet would be going, well, hang on, that's exactly the only reason why I'd want to go up there, is to see what that feels like. So it's interesting to see, all of the developments and all of the innovations that we have. And you're quite right. We get a lot of things. Solar panel technology, for example, sun power certainly when I was involved in the industry, was sort of one of the best solar manufacturers, and some of the technology they used was designed by NASA. So, I think I think we benefit massively from this sort of innovation. Now, just very quickly to Steve, because I know you're going to be going soon, Steve. I'm not going to do the homework because I'm tired. Like, who else do I need to celebrate? We've got black. Like, I'm not even American, right? I've got to celebrate Black History Month and find some black person from a country that I don't live in to celebrate. Then you've got Women's Month. You got Trans Vengeance Day. Then you've got Asian American Day, and I don't ever see like the Irish American History Month or the British American
now
or anything
March
like that. So,
17th.
like, I'm just tired.
March 17th. Irish celebrate on March 17th.
They do.
Okay, Dan. Well, I stand
Hold on a
corrected.
second. Now, there are celebrations that are, now they might not be entire months, but I think even Michael would be aware of this. There are celebrations around Italian culture. There are celebrations around Irish culture. There are celebrations around a number of other cultures. Now, whether they get an entire month or not, that's
They
another
don't get-
question,
yeah,
and
but
that's
they don't
another
get their
debate.
national-
There are
Mark,
definitely
national
celebrations
holiday,
around various
right?
different
Mark, I've
ethnicities.
been with Pod TV and previously IBM TV since shortly after its inception. I have never heard anybody on here ever announce, "Hey, it's Irish American Day, it's Italian Day, it's Christian Day." I've never heard that. And
No,
honestly,
listen to
I
some of
remember
our
when I was
interviews,
a
because I'm
child.
just
That
saying
would
that-
be
when I
Christmas
was-
and Easter. Christmas. and Easter.
When I was a child, well, they're trying to cancel that, Dan. When I was a child, I remember, going to school and first of all, we had Red Nose Day, which I'm not sure if you have in America, but we had this
We
thing
do.
called Red Nose
There's
Day.
definitely a big
People put a red
holiday.
nose on the buses and the cars. Then
Yeah,
you
that's
had this
golf.
other thing where you had to wear a ribbon. There was a blue ribbon and a white ribbon and a red ribbon and a green ribbon. There was all these ribbons. And by the end of it, you're just like, nobody cares anymore. They're just going along with it, just buying the ribbon because they're expected to. And it's too much. There's just too much of this. It's too much of being required to celebrate people that you don't know for things that, are potentially dubious.
Well, I mean, let's hear Michael's thoughts on this, because definitely there are.
Well, no, I'll
within
leave Michael alone. You don't
There's
need to respond to
things even in
anything
the
other than the
scientific
space stuff.
community that are acknowledged, and you mentioned Red Nose Day. Red Nose Day is celebrated here. There are a number of other things that are celebrated in the science space, and yes, some people may get overwhelmed by some of these celebrations, and I'm not.
Well, not all these
Michael-
celebrations, but the constant barrage of just incessant, unlimited stuff that I am supposed to care about. I don't have the time.
Michael, what is your thoughts?
Well, I mean, what you decide to care about and what you decide not to care about is totally up to you. I mean, talking about Italian Americans and, trying to celebrate them. I was invited on the show today. And of course, the book about Tony Genzano, he was the son of two Italian immigrants. And he grew up in Philadelphia, and he did magnificent, amazing things. He trained 62 astronauts, including all the ones that you could know, all the ones that you would ever name. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Alan Shepard, John Glenn, all of those guys came and sat out on Tony's front porch in Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Wow.
Because that was the best place for them to train, was to come to Moorhead Planetarium and do that training. And most people don't even know about this. It's like the secret space town. So
That's interesting. I never knew that. That's fascinating. And that's
it's this cultural thing that we don't really know as North Carolinians, but I think we should all be incredibly proud of the fact that out of everywhere in the country, including Chicago, New York, and all of the other major cities that had planetariums at the time, where did they choose to train? They chose Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and they didn't just choose it for a year or two or five. They chose it for 16 years, from 1960 to 1975. And so, all of the, Mercury and Gemini and all the way through Apollo and Skylab missions, all of that training happened here in North Carolina. So, a great point of pride for any of us Tar Heels or old North Staters, if you prefer.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Hey, Michael, just out of curiosity, what is, sometimes when we think about space exploration and some of the great benefits we got from space, some people will definitely mention some of the things that go into our technology, whether that's the phone or the computers. Some people also give a teasing nod to tank, which most people don't like because it's not the greatest invention in the world. But what are some of the inventions that you are glad that came out of space exploration? And are there any other things other than tank that you're going like, maybe we didn't need to invent that?
One of my favorite inventions is what protects our police officers and our military personnel, Kevlar. Kevlar was developed to go into spacesuits, and so it was something that was part of the space program. Another thing that protects all of us, anybody in the world who ever has bought a smoke detector or stayed in a hotel where you have a smoke detector in your room and on your floor, smoke detection is something that they developed so that they could go into space safely. And so, yeah, I mean, there are a million different things that you can talk about. There's Velcro and there's, Mylar and there's a whole bunch of other things like that. But I mean, just think about it. Every time you put your head on your pillow and go to sleep, you know that you are going to sleep safely, because if there is a fire that comes up, that smoke detector is going to catch that signal of that smoke. And that came directly from the space program.
I just want to say, Michael, anybody who comes on this show, I always buy their books. So I've already placed an order on Amazon for your book. And just for our international audience that is outside of the United States, if you are in the UK, Australia, and New Zealand, that book is actually available on Amazon. So,
Thank you so much, I appreciate that very, very much.
Shaquille does a great job of definitely supporting the authors that come on, even those authors that he may not necessarily agree with. He does a great job of that. We've also got Nick with us as well. Nick is one of the founders, along with Kim Calhoun, of the network, and is always here on World Edition. So I think Nick may have some questions for you as well. He is North Carolina. He went and grew up a lot of his time in various places, including Florida, which of course is where Cape Canaveral is, and a lot of the other space parts as well. So, Nick, you got any thoughts?
I also have a copy of Nick's book.
Space oriented.
I also have a copy of Nick's book, which is not available on Amazon. I had to hunt it down, and when I finally got it, held it up on the screen and started quoting parts of it, he sort of saw his face going, "Oh shit, he got my book. How did he do that?" But I did manage to get it.
I hate books. Oh, don't say that. I never read.
Oh, yeah.
But I will have to get a copy of your book now that Shaquille got it. It's kind of if Shaquille gets it, I get to get it too.
Every author that ever appears on our shows, even if I'm not on the show with them, I will purchase their books, and I have a pretty interesting collection of books. The author that I have the most books off is actually David Cay Johnston, who I respect massively. We do disagree on a lot of points, but I respect him massively. And of course, he's got a Pulitzer Prize, so I find his books fascinating. Nick, over to you.
I can't believe North Carolina. How did they get anything from Florida? There's got to be a story behind this. I grew up in Florida. Florida was the space program until LBJ, that horrible Democrat, stole our space center and moved it to Houston.
Then, wait a second. You're a Democrat.
There's got to be a story.
Yeah, but he used to be a Republican before he lost his mind, and he was a Republican.
Yeah.
So Langley, Virginia was the center of astronaut operations in the earliest days of NASA. And so if you draw a map, mentally in your head of where Langley is and then where Cape Canaveral is, and then from Langley over to Houston, you realize that flying over Chapel Hill, North Carolina is inevitable. But one of the things that really drove this decision was that John Motley Moorhead III had really spared no expense. We had the best equipment. We still have the best equipment that's available to anybody in the planetarium field. And so they had gone to a smaller planetarium. They looked at the stars. They said, gosh, we can see value in this, but let's find a place with better stars. And so they went to Moorhead. They called them up and said, hey, Tony, can you train the astronauts? So some of the things that really drove it, though, was that it's on a college campus with a robust astronomy program. It's in a place where you don't have to fight traffic. You don't have to fight autograph seekers. And so the astronauts, they would fly into town. They would drive over to Moorhead Planetarium. They would quietly train for 1 or 2 days. They would go and they would stay at a nearby hotel. And then they would visit with the Ginzanos. They would go and have spaghetti dinner with Tony and Myrtle Ginzano, and they would just have a great old time there. There's some great photographs of Neil Armstrong sitting on their front porch with them. And so we got that part of the space program because we had great equipment, great people to train with. And then we also just, they didn't have to fight for parking. I mean, why else would you choose someplace, it's really convenient to pull up to the front door.
I'm going to look you up, Michael, when I come to North Carolina next, and I want to go and see this planetarium. It sounds fantastic. I do have a question for you guys. When Obama was the president, there was a storm in a teacup. There was a little bit of a diplomatic spat between Australia and America, and it's America's fault because they don't have a sense of humor like we do. One of the
it was Obama's fault. Let's be clear.
Yeah, well, no, I won't blame Obama for this. I'll just blame the entire country. So what had happened was I think it was a Challenger, but one of the space missions had exploded, 30, 40 years ago, and some of the debris landed in a very, very remote part of Western Australia. And when one of the ambassadors or senators or somebody was visiting, the mayor of the local council thought it was a fun idea to send them a fine for littering with 30 years of overdue fees. And they didn't think that was that funny, the Americans, so they contacted Obama, and the president of the United States apparently rang the Prime Minister and said, "What's this fine?" And of course, everyone in Australia thought that was hilarious, but the Americans didn't quite catch on to our jokes and our sense of humor.
No, I think it's a funny joke, and I think you're actually referring to Skylab. When Skylab broke up, it actually broke up in pieces over Australia, and so some of the foremost minds today who tell you about that history are Emily Carney with Space Hipsters on Facebook. She can tell you all of the history of Skylab. And then there's also Searching for Skylab, which is a great documentary that tells all about that. But no, I think it's actually a very funny joke. How dare we, start littering our spacecraft pieces all over Australia.
Well, more recently, you guys accidentally dropped a missile on the Great Barrier Reef, but we'll let you off on that one. I did an assignment when I was doing physics in high school.
Thank you, guys. I got to go, but thank you. I'll see you Friday.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah. I did an assignment when I was doing physics in high school, and it was about the Mars Explorer, which had flown in on the wrong angle and burnt up. And the thing that I've learned about that is I think when we make mistakes, that's actually a way that we actually lead to great innovation. It's often when something doesn't work. And the problem that caused that was that the United States used the metric system, but the United States didn't build everything themselves. And so other countries used the metric system instead of the imperial system, I meant to say. And so because, if we're using centimeters and millimeters and you guys are using inches, what ends up happening was people were rounding rather than actually converting. And so the rounding errors were infinitesimally small, but over such a large difference that actually meant that the Mars probe didn't actually meet its entry point and burned up. So, I think that it's very interesting when we see when things do go wrong, we learn a lot as well. And it's a pity when we see lives being lost. There was no lives lost in that one, but that is a huge way that we all expand and improve the lives of humanity.
No doubt. Hey, Michael, just really quickly, and then I've got to ask a question for Sasha as well. But how accessible is the Moorhead Planetarium, because we do know that COVID definitely made things less accessible, but now things are opening up. So how accessible is it to get to the Moorhead Planetarium? How many visitors are we getting in that area? Because I do know for a long time it was a crown jewel of North Carolina. A lot of people from around the country and around the world would come to visit. So how accessible is it at this particular time?
I'm glad you asked that, Mark, because Morehead Planetarium actually underwent a renovation that almost coincided exactly with the onset of COVID. And so as they had to shut down, they were actually pumping millions of dollars into renovating the building and bringing in new exhibits and making the theater more accessible and having really incredible shows. Recently, they just replaced the star machines there, and now the star field is so glorious. I mean, you really feel like it's a daytime visit. You go into the theater, you lie back and you look up at the stars, and you forget that it's daytime, and you stumble out of the doors at the very end. So other than the stumbling from how astonishingly marvelous it all is, I would say that it's very accessible these days. They have regular shows every weekend. And I don't know if you're aware, have you heard of the North Carolina Science Festival? Have any of you caught on to that at all?
Tell us a little bit more about that. I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, the North Carolina Science Festival is this endeavor that Morehead Planetarium thought up. They just said, you know what? Why don't we celebrate science? Why don't we have ways of making it accessible to all people across not just the state, but across the globe? And so back in 2010, they put together the first North Carolina Science Festival. It was the biggest celebration of science anywhere in the world. It was so powerful that people in the Middle East have actually flown the director of Morehead Planetarium over to their country to figure out how to put together a countrywide science festival. But the Science Festival just finished yesterday. It's 30 days of celebrating science. It's more than 400 science celebrations across the whole state. It hits all 100 counties, and it's the exemplar for all of the other science festivals all across the nation and the world. So the neat thing is, if you want to learn about how to brew the best coffee scientifically, go to that event. If you want to see anything about the science of cemeteries, you go to that one. You want to learn about outer space, you go to a different festival. But that's the glorious thing about the North Carolina Science Festival is it's 30 days of just celebrating science, and it usually kicks off with the UNC Science Expo, which is like a street festival of science, complete with food trucks, complete with 80 or 90 booths of robotics and the science of bubbles and the science of chemistry experiments. And I mean, it's very, very hands-on. My illustrator and I actually took part in it this year on April 1st. We did a book signing at our booth, and we had coloring pages for kids, so that they could color pages of Tony Genzano and of outer space. So it's the festival is this thing that's been going on for more than 10 years that Morehead put together, and it lives up to its motto of science for all. Love it.
I would absolutely throw my support behind that. And I think when we talk about education on this show, that's the sort of thing that I think that our kids across the United States, Western countries like the ones that I'm living in outside of the US, that's the sort of thing that we should be doing with our kids.
Yeah, I live in North Carolina, never heard of it. I mean,
exactly, Nick. And I spend more time in North Carolina than anywhere else except for California when I'm in the United States. And I hadn't heard of it. So that's something that needs attention.
Publicity.
Yeah, the only issue that I would have is when Michael said that in the middle of the day you lie down, look at the stars, and then you stumble out of the door. That sounds like Sasha and I after a bottle of his vodka in the middle of the day.
It does sound like that.
Well, that's the question I was going to ask is, Michael, how big, because there was a time that we talked about the space race, and Sasha is Ukrainian by descent, but originally involved in the Russian military way back when, and all in that space, and is definitely very much a Ukrainian citizen and can't stand what the Russians are doing, and rightfully so, and all in that space. But I do remember that glorious space race and everything. I don't even know that Russia could put up a spaceship right now based on what they're doing and all in that space. But is there any possibility of there being a space race, maybe with India, maybe with some other countries, but is there going to be a global space race of any sort?
I think if there is going to be any sort of space race, it's definitely going to involve all of those commercial space exploration, corporations at this point. I mean, SpaceX and all of the others. They're going to have a huge role in it. But don't underestimate the Chinese. Don't underestimate the Indian government and what they're doing right now. I think we're not ever going to see that same sort of global spirit for, hey, let's all be adventurers. Let's go explore our local universe together. I'm not sure that we're going to see that same sort of space race, evolve here in the current atmosphere. But I think what's going to happen is you're going to have all these commercial, space corporations that are going to go out there and they're going to figure out how to, as earlier Shaquille was saying, to mine asteroids, right? And to go to the moon and find resources that are there that are unique, like, hydrogen-3, I think there isn't going to be a space race in the same sense as, the glorious Soviet Union and the glorious United States and us, triumphing in the end with Neil Armstrong setting foot on the moon. But I think that there are going to be so many more people that we bring along with us that's going to make it even more fun, right? Because it was all these aviators who went in the early days, and now it's going to be poets and musicians as well as all of those scientists who are going up there. And who better to tell us about the universe than a poet, than a writer?
Well, if you're going to send Hollywood musicians up there, just leave them there, please.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Any Democrats that go, leave them there.
It's all wonderful and great, but tell me, as you mentioned before, there could be commercial space exploitation to find some resources and natural resources and so on. So these corporations, they will invest certain money to achieve their goals, and then there are two scenarios: either they will be, or maybe three, they will be successful and they will find it, they will be extremely successful, and they will become so powerful that they will buy all other corporations together, and including probably US government and everything else.
Well, they're already owned.
Or they will not be successful at all and just lose a bunch of money, and that's the end of story. Why the general population should be so excited about whether corporations will make tons of money or they will lose tons of money? What makes a difference for people who cannot scrap together $400 for their existence? What do they have to do with all that?
I think if there's any one thing that comes with the space program, with any space program, it is inspiration. I mean, we all need to realize that we are explorers. We're
Michael, I disagree with you. I'll tell you why. The excitement was 60 years ago when Americans landed on the moon, or 55 years ago. But that excitement is gone. Furthermore, today technology does not allow even to repeat what was done 55 years ago. So where is the excitement? Are you trying to excite people that now, 55 years later, maybe not even this year, not next year, but say next 5 years, you will again bring people to the moon? What's excitement?
Sasha, can I just say something on that? The idea of mining asteroids and other objects in space has been touted for a long time, and I think that our technology is getting to a point where that is a foreseeable, viable thing. We don't have the technology yet, but it's foreseeable that we're going to develop those sorts of technologies. Now, a lot of the things that we rely on here on Earth, unfortunately, come from mining, which causes a lot of environmental damage. I have grave concerns about the idea of mining in any shape or form on the moon, because we don't know what that effect is, and we've done enough damage to our own planet, leave the moon alone. But certainly when it comes to asteroids, if we can bring things that we need here on this planet from an asteroid, as opposed to us destroying our environment, I actually think that would be a massive advancement for us. And I think that, the electrification of the world is certainly going to be, hugely beneficial if we get it right. Now, that I don't like a lot of the things that are being pushed, and I don't like the way the government is trying to roll things out. But if we can get that right, I think that's going to be massively helpful. I think that's going to improve the lives of a great many people. Now, the fact that there are a lot of people that don't have a lot of money in the bank, we're not responsible for every single person on the planet, or even if we're just talking about the United States. People overspend. People spend money on things that they shouldn't. You can use government power to prevent them from spending money on things that they shouldn't if you want to make sure they've got more money in their bank. But at the end of the day, people should be able to live their lives how they see fit, and that shouldn't mean that other sorts of programs that could potentially be beneficial should not be funded whilst some other issue exists.
Hey, Shaquille, just really quickly, and I know you're going to hate me for bringing this up, but I'm going to throw it to Michael with a certain kind of question and everything. But there seems to be a rise in an interest, not just in science, but in science fiction. And yes, this is where I know that Shaquille's going to get a little bit perturbed that I'm bringing this up and everything, because there's even a certain kind of type of science fiction that became very popular more recently because it gave a minority twist to science fiction. It's called Afrofuturism and all in that space and everything. But I'm just wondering, do you think that there is a rise and a greater interest in science fiction in general? We did see one of the great Afrofuturism movies being
what is Afro?
Black Panthers.
If you're going to say that I'm not going to like it, what is Afrofuturism?
Afrofuturism is like a look at the future from an African-American standpoint. So the Black Panther is a primary example of Afrofuturism. You're seeing the way that the future might look to a certain ethnic group and all in that space. Octavia Butler is considered an Afrofuturist.
So I love this story about Nichelle Nichols.
Right.
I don't know if you all remember her, but Uhura from the original Star Trek.
Right.
She put in a year doing Star Trek. She really enjoyed it. She thought that it was great, but she also saw it as just a vehicle for her to, potentially get other gigs. And so after 1 year, she went to Gene Roddenberry and said, I'm going to have to finish. I'm all done with this. And he said, no, please don't leave. Please just think about it over the weekend. Well, over the weekend, she went to an NAACP meeting, and somebody came up to her and said, a big Star Trek fan is coming and really wants to come and visit with you for a minute. And she's like, okay, I guess I'll see the little Trekkie, no problem. She turned around and there was Martin Luther King Jr. walking toward her. And she said, that little Trekkie is just going to have to wait. And Martin Luther King Jr. walked up to her and said, I hope you understand that I am your biggest fan. Yours is the only TV show that I allow my children to stay up late and watch. And she said, oh, well, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave because I have other gigs. I have other things that I can do. And he said, you cannot do that. Please do not do that. You must stay with Star Trek. You are the only figure on any TV program where a Black person is not seen as a criminal or as a menial laborer. You are on the Starship Enterprise. You are an officer. You're somebody that everybody talks to and listens to and cares about. Please do not leave. You're an example to all of us. So I think that when you talk about Afrofuturism or any other kind of scientific, science fiction or speculative fiction, I think we all need that inspiration, because if you can't see the future you want to live in, how can you possibly build it? Right? So that's the beauty of science fiction, is that with things like Black Panther, and I mean, there are a million other examples. Star Trek is making several live action TV shows even today, and they're all fantastic. And it's because they're not this post-apocalyptic, terrible world that we have to live in. These are all worlds in which they say, guys, we solved it. And guess what? There's fun stuff to do out here. There's exploration. There are other species that we can go say hello to. So, Mark, I'm glad that you brought it up, because I think science fiction is having sort of a rebirth right now, and it's having a rebirth with everybody represented, which makes me as happy a person as can possibly be.
So I'm going to have to come back at. I'll leave you alone, Michael. I'm going to come back at Mark. So, firstly, well, that's a great story about that Michael told about Martin Luther King. Isn't it great that America has moved on and is not the same country that it was back then? But when you want to talk about diversity, okay, African Americans are not the only minority in the world. They are the minority, perhaps, in the United States. There's no African Americans in Australia because they would be Australian Africans, right?
Right.
So this kind of thing that America is pushing out, which seeks to prioritize in the whole world whatever the woke agenda is in the United States, what about the rest of us? And in the interest of diversity, are you going to take Gurman Indians like my family from Fiji, and you're going to give them representation? Are you going to take people from Taiwan and China and the Chinese people that live in Canada and etc.? Are you going to take the Japanese that came to Australia and have and combined with Aboriginal people and mixed race Aboriginal and Indigenous with Japanese? Are we going to include them? Is there going to be a limit to that? No, let me finish. Or do the rest of us not matter? And the only thing that matters is this American woke agenda, which prioritizes African Americans over every other racial minority in the world.
Well,
Shaquille, it's really amazing because I don't feel like you've been watching Star Trek Discovery. It's got people from all different nationalities. There is an Indian American gentleman or an Indian British gentleman who's a prominent figure who's in this.
Yes, Michael.
Backgrounds.
Yes, Michael. But an Indian
future in which everybody is represented, and that's
Michael.
That's
that's not true.
God.
Michael, sorry, Michael. That's not true. Because if we're going to talk about India, for example, and I'm not particularly passionate about this, I'm just pushing back against it. If we're going to talk about India, India's had the caste system. India has also had the influence of Western countries, not just the England, but other countries that have gone into India. And Indians have been dispersed all over the world. The experience of a British Indian or an American Indian or an Indian American, to differentiate, is going to be wildly different to the experience of a Fijian Indian. And that was the point that I'm making. There is a whole heap of different diverse groups. There's a whole heap of very small minorities. There's only about 800,000 people that live in Fiji. So arguably there's less than 1.5 million people around the world. Are they going to be represented? Probably not.
No,
the reality and representing us by saying, look, we've got an Indian who may have been from a different caste, who may have been actually somebody that you were fighting with that oppressed you a few hundred years ago. That's not representation. That is Americans trying to meet diversity quotas that they think apply rather than everybody else. And the point that I'm trying to make is this idea that we have to always be looking at diversity, but then when someone points something out, they get ignored. This is just a nonsense. We're all human beings. We all breathe the same air. We all shed the same blood. And perhaps we should put some of these race issues behind us, Mark.
Well, first off, to Michael's point, and I agree with him, if you look at the various science fiction, and particularly the Star Trek series, they did a great job of exploring the various ethnicities. It wasn't just the African Americans. There was a number of other parts of the population. And I do hear what you're saying, Shaquille, in the sense of tokenism, because that is an issue in a lot of spaces and all of that. But I would argue, and I don't know that I have the statistics to back it, but when it comes to diversity and to at least being an attempt at being fair in that sense, I personally think, and Michael may push back on me, he may not, but I personally think that as we moved further into the space program has done one of the greatest jobs of all of the industries in terms of being diverse, because I definitely remember some African Americans that have gone up in space. I remember some Asian Americans that have gone up in space.
But again, that's my point. You say they've done a great job of diversity because, and then you immediately list African Americans, Asian Americans, etc. Okay. Let's keep this to America then. We'll forget about cultures outside of the United States. We'll just pretend that the United States is the only thing that matters. Tell me, was there any Mormons depicted in Star Trek? Were there any Catholics
No.
in there? Were there any of those? Were there any Seventh-day Adventists or Presbyterians in there?
See, there's no
That
religion in the
controversy doesn't
future.
matter.
Linda, come on.
Yeah, there's
Shaquille,
no
stop
religion
it.
in the future.
But let me ask you further. Why isn't WRAL showing about the science fair? I live here and I never heard about this science fair. Okay? Let me tell you what really goes on. The media is anti-intellectualism. Seriously, because they're a bunch of dummies. Because a bunch of dummies, all they do is talk about race. They don't talk about the science fair. So I'll hear, or transgender. I'll hear about transgender garbage, race garbage all day long, but I won't hear about the bloody science fair because the people in who journalistic majors, obviously Mark Lee is excluded from that, don't care about anything intellectually. So what they do is
why are we excluding Mark Lee? He never told you about the space fair either.
So Michael, I never heard of the
Michael.
science fair. I've lived here for at least 6 years now, and you're telling me it's one of the largest science fairs in the world. And I listen to WRAL. Maybe I shouldn't listen to them. And they'll discuss the latest transgender bill, but they will not discuss what you're doing. So what are your thoughts on that? Why is the
Hold
media
on a second. I want to hear your
ignoring
thoughts,
you?
but I want to hear your
I
thoughts.
don't
but
really
like-
give a ratchet about transgender.
No,
I want to hear about science,
I want
baby.
to hear about the science fair too, but I'm going to
I
actually
don't
back
wanna hear
you up.
about- I wanna
I
hear
want
about
to
the
back you up,
science
and then I
fair.
want to hear both Michael and Sasha's thoughts around this as well, because I was actually, it's one of the things that we aired recently. I was airing a musical performance. We were airing it on our events page. It was actually at the World Chess Hall of Fame. The World Chess Hall of Fame apparently is in St. Louis, and they have a great connection between the music world and the chess world. But I don't know that St. Louis has covered that. And that was actually one of the concerts that we covered because Reese Palmer, who is from here, actually performed there, as did a couple of other folks. But it is literally based in St. Louis. Have you seen any news coverage of that either? Because
No.
it makes the parallel between chess
No.
and music.
But chess even has a smaller demographic group than science. And Michael's event that he is saying, so I'm going to go to the Greek festival. It's this Saturday. Okay, great. I hear about that. But I hear about the Skies Festival. I don't hear about any science festival. Okay, why are we ashamed in the United States of science? Tell me, Michael.
Because science is racist, according to your party, Nick. Go for it, Michael. And Lee, you've got to come in and say something.
Yeah.
I really hate to say it, but there are probably a few more gray hairs here, including my own, on this broadcast than there are youngsters who abound. And I'm just going to say an awful lot of the North Carolina Science Festival advertising comes through Instagram and TikTok, as well as a lot of those more online services. But if you do tune in to certain WRAL early morning broadcasts, there will be talk about planetary alignments. There will be talk about eclipses. There will be talk about things that go on, and Moorhead is featured on there regularly. And there was great advertising that was on various news stations across the state of North Carolina. So I think it's more that it's an indication that we're all drinking from a fire hose. If you don't know who the artist, the singer Joji is, well, I only know because I have 3 teenagers, so I guess my only point to you,
I'm only in my 30s over here.
Very easily found if it's something that you're really listening for, and it's something that you hear about. Now that I've said that there's the North Carolina Science Festival, I hope you're just going to see a flood of it everywhere, because your reticular activation system, which is part of your brain that tries to filter up and bubble up the things that matter to you most in the world, right? You get 40 million pieces of information coming at you at any second, right? But only about 30 to 40 of those actually bubble up into your conscious mind. And so the reticular activation system, now that I've said North Carolina Science Festival, you're hopefully going to hear about it a whole bunch in the next few days. And it's because the RAS is hard at work.
You know what? It's hard at work.
I'm actually only in my 30s over here, Michael. So be gentle with the grey hair comments. But I will say that Kimberly Calhoun, who's one of the co-founders of the show or of the network, has a lot to do with NASA and has worked in this sort of field. And I think that between all of us, I'm sure that we can bring a lot of attention to that science fair. And I would encourage everybody who's part of our network to do that. Lee, we haven't had a chance to say very much yet, so let's give you a few minutes.
I just got a few points. One is I like the story with Martin Luther King and Star Trek. But what I for the life of me, I don't understand why people will complain about negative stereotypes, but at the same time, they'll reinforce them by playing negative stereotypes in the movies and TV. I don't get it. So I understand why Martin Luther King wanted the positive stereotype. That's one. The second point, real quickly, is the STEM courses. Amazingly, they don't care about pronouns. Physics, gravity, they don't care what you call yourself with pronoun. You can't fight physics with what your feelings. It doesn't care about your feelings.
Well, but Lee, when we've got an education system that's telling kids that maths is racist, when we are trying to get rid of standardized testing, look, I don't like this of no child left behind policy that America had, and that we had something similar, because it didn't work, right? We need to understand that a one size fits all approach isn't going to work. But then there's pushback against charter schools. There's pushback against parental choice in schooling. There's pushback where against maths courses at the same time that they're trying to encourage people that have historically been underrepresented in maths and physics and science. There's pushback against them studying. Obama, when he was the president, said, look, a black kid in America who tries to study, is at the library studying, is going to be told, why are you acting so white? I hear from people, it's more normally jovial than joking, but I hear it from people when they say, Shaquille, you're the whitest person that we know. Why? Because I'm an investment banker and I studied maths and statistics and all that sort of stuff. I mean, we can't expect, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't expect to rip the guts out of the education system, to put the issues that Nick talked about, transgender issues and sex issues and race issues and all this sort of stuff into the school system, and then also expect people to be focused on maths and statistics and physics and chemistry and biology and all those other subjects. So I agree with you that pronouns don't matter to the STEM subjects, but yet the universities that offer those STEM subjects have quotas based on those sorts of things that shouldn't matter. And I think that holds us back. And it's not just in the United States, it's all over the Western world.
Indeed,
Michael,
it's true.
And the ones
Michael,
that they're
any
doing it
thoughts or
for, it
anything?
hurts them the most because it's dumbing down the system for them. They suffer as opposed to bringing them up.
I'm not sure.
One argument.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if there's a request for me to comment on any of this, but
No, you don't. Yeah, we get a bit heated, Michael, so you don't need to get involved in our arguments.
I'm happy to. I do feel like I run an academy at my day job over at Gilead Sciences, which is a pharmaceutical company, and we're finding amazing, diverse candidates to come in the door and become amazing young programmers. My focus is on finding incredible talent. And if I can find that incredible talent from a really diverse pool of candidates, then why not? And so I guess my only comment on all of this is, yes, gender pronouns don't necessarily matter in a maths course, but the people who are taking the maths course are all human beings. And to say that our feelings don't matter, we are beings that make our decisions based on feelings. Right? We use logic to shore up emotional decisions. I mean, if you ever decide to get married, that's an emotional decision, and there better be some logic that's in there somewhere. But if you decide what to eat, if you decide where to go to college, if you decide what your next TV shows that you're going to watch, it is so much based on feelings. And so if we're not taking into account the feelings of the humans who are present in a situation, then I don't think we're being as kind as we could be.
No, Michael, I agree with you.
Michael, who cares about kindness?
But it doesn't.
Who really cares?
I care about kindness very, very deeply.
I'll let Lee go, and then I'll respond to you. I'll let Lee respond, and then I'll respond to you.
Yeah, the book that I'm writing right now is called
I agree with you on a personal level for sure, and even on a group level, we should care about others' feelings. But we should not ignore reality just because someone feels something that is not real. If someone's schizophrenic and I feel Martians are talking to me, it's not helpful for my wife to say, you know what? What are they saying? Well,
Michael, let me say to you.
I'm not obese, okay? But if I start getting emaciated because I feel obese, it's not helpful for someone to tell me, well, maybe you should go for surgery or see a doctor so you can lose more weight.
Michael, when I say who cares about feelings, let me put it to you like this. If you tell me that you're critical of anybody who says they don't like Star Trek, and then I say, well, I actually really liked Lost in Space, the original black and white Lost in Space, and I think that was a much better show than Star Trek. And then you say, well, that really hurts my feelings. So, like why can't I just? I can have my preferences. So then, if to be, you know, if we're going to go down the pronoun path, oh look, I'm sorry. You know, if you want to be called she, her when you're biological male, maybe I'll go along with that in the right circumstances. I might even out of politeness, you know, go with they, them, maybe. But now we've got neo-pronouns. We've got people that are changing their pronouns multiple times a day. You come to me and say to me that you want me to call you clown, self-pronouns, or God, self-pronouns, or demon, self-pronouns. Sorry, buddy, I don't give a shit about your feelings that much. And if you think that's unkind, I'll wear that because I'm not doing it.
Well, I don't necessarily know that it's unkind as it is that you need to select, you know, where do you want to spend your time and with what people do you want to spend your
But that
time?
works both ways.
Well, I don't want to spend my time with a group of people that are going by clown, self-pronouns. I can tell you that.
There's no way that I would ever judge you for wanting to be part of that group or not wanting to be part of that group ever. You know?
I would clearly judge you.
Michael, thank you so much for being with us. I've loved having, we've all loved having you on. I hope you're back.
Yeah.
Nick, we need the link.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Nick, we need the link for economics, please. We've messaged you.